Okay, welcome to this special edition of extraktTalks. I'm Dr. John Thompson, and today I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Caplan, Dr. Benjamin Caplan of a CED Clinic. He is a very remarkable person. He has basically served as Chief Medical Officer of Canna Docs, overseeing over 250,000 patients. So he has a tremendous amount of experience helping patients with their illnesses, with their sleep, with their pain. He has a very impressive background. He started at Tufts University and he completed his residency at Boston University. And he's the founder of CED Foundations and also CED Clinic. He is currently a certified doctor of family medicine and he's board certified. So this is the guy we're talking to. We're very excited to have him. And let's get into this interview. Welcome, Dr. Caplan, to our show, extraktTalks. Very happy to have you here. I was just reading your bio, and it says in there that you have really interacted with over 250,000 patients dealing with cannabis and also hemp, I suppose. And just tell me a little bit about that. That's a very impressive amount of people.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think very few people understand exactly what is required for the physicians as we kind of train and learn a trade. Most clinicians coming out of residency are seeing folks 24 hours a day, or these days a little bit less than that, but for 4 straight years, and then even beyond that.
Right.
So the life of a physician is quite busy.
Right.
I am fortunate to be someone who thinks out of the box, and I jumped into cannabis on the early side. And I saw a clear need for education and for clarification
Right.
to correct, global misunderstandings, but certainly in my neck of the woods.
Right.
And I was in a position early on of supervising a lot of clinicians, other doctors seeing patients. And I got to review with them the cases and sort of dive in, not just to the literature, but to what patients were actually telling us.
Right.
Sometimes literature tells one story, but it's not a complete picture.
Right. Right.
But then seeing patients who are going through pain or dealing with unbearable stress or, can't sleep at night and any number of other, conditions is a very different matter.
Right. Yeah, I downloaded one of the pieces of information that you have on your website, and it says, "I want help falling asleep." I thought that was such a great summary of how you would use a cannabis product, what you would use it for, what the dosages are. I mean, it's all really there. And I'd like to interact with you on that particular document a little bit, because
Sure.
there's just so much great information. So many people have problems, for example, going to sleep. And what has been your experiences with, a lot of people are using like CBD to go to sleep. Mm-hmm. And
yep.
We know that that's from the FDA and from the drugs that are on the market right now, that we know that that's a side effect actually of CBD. And I was noticing that you're kind of recommending more of a one-to-one approach for THC and CBD, or kind of a mixed balanced approach. What is your thoughts on that, and how do you really rationalize, what really works, and what's been your experience?
So it's a huge treasure chest of information. I think, I generally put up information on the website, which is sort of applicable to many, many people.
Right.
And that's not really the recipe for success with any medicine. I'll fully admit that, and certainly not with cannabis. I think actually cannabis medicine and regular medicine must be personalized. It must be individualized, one person to the next. The pharmaceutical industry and the sort of medical industrial complex would have us believe that one size fits all because, that's easier to manufacture and commercialize. It's not really the best medicine.
Right.
And one of the awesome things about cannabinoid medicine, whether it's CBD or THC or other terpenes, is really taking a look at what we don't know, which is right now a lot of it. And that's very humbling to clinicians, and makes us sort of think more carefully about the person in front of us.
Right.
Is this person someone who wants to be euphoric or not at all?
Right.
Is this someone who wants relief falling asleep, or
Right.
is it staying asleep?
Right.
Or is it both? And these kinds of nuances are not amenable to just take this pill and call me later.
Right.
That sort of attitude from clinicians is just doesn't belong in cannabis. That's one of the things that drew me to it. I really love a puzzle, and I love learning about someone, a patient in front of me, and learning about what makes them different, what tools would help them in a way that's different from anybody else.
Right, right.
That's the sort of Sherlock Holmes of medicine, which is so fun.
Right. No, I mean, it's kind of interesting. A lot of people have been playing with these ratios and, formulating them. And then what's really awesome about your knowledge basically is then you're able to go out there and understand, okay, here's what's actually happening clinically with the patient. So has there been a time when, for example, you would prescribe like a 1-to-1 and then they'd come back to you and say, hey, look, this is too much for me or whatever. And they come back all the time. Okay.
All the time. Yes.
Okay. It's total consultative
there's
approach.
There's nothing magical about
Right.
me, and there's nothing magical about the literature, which is guiding me.
Right.
It just helps me understand, if I'm a hiker, if I go hiking enough, I start to understand what happens if my right foot falls or if there's gravel on the ground. I know how to navigate those things better than if I wasn't hiking all the time.
Right.
The same is true of cannabis. I'm interacting with people taking thousands of different medicines, and I'm gracious to have patients who teach me about their experience.
Right.
I'm also, I guess, bold to be in the business world, and I'm working with people in other fields which help me learn through their eyes.
Right.
For example, I have an app company that is surveying people to teach the app about where they're coming from and what they're learning about cannabis.
Right.
And I'm in the weeds, so to speak, learning about what people are finding helpful.
Right.
So I'm constantly learning.
Right. Right. Well, that app, let's talk about that app a little bit, because it really is kind of where the rubber meets the road. In the past, you would have someone fill out a sheet, or you may occasionally, like every 2 weeks, you'd have them keep a journal or something along those lines, right? Is that how you would do it? And now it's more like, hey, I have this. I'm gonna give real time feedback, and that's recorded, and then you can chart it. So how's that?
It's actually you're right, except it's not just the digitization of a journal.
Okay.
What we're doing actually is taking a physician's understanding and taking the experience of being a clinician, understanding these many people, and putting it into the app so that someone can basically have a clinician's perspective on cannabis in the app. It's not just, oh, here's what I did and how I felt. And
right.
Jane and Joe and Josh over here also felt that. So that must mean this is a feature of that particular medicine. It's
right.
not just that. It is that at a basic level.
Right.
But beyond that, it's guiding state change. So if I'm someone who has trouble sleeping and I want something which is not going to make me groggy in the morning, I want something which might be a little euphoric at night, but isn't going to make me feel anything weird in the next day, that can be computed by a clinician. And then
right.
we're trying to translate that into machine learning and artificial intelligence inside the app
right.
to give people that on the go, a companion app.
Right. So so you're basically taking kind of the big data approach to multiple people, or multiple thousands of people actually, who are
Mm-hmm.
putting the information into the app, and then you're applying AI or machine learning to that to really get to the point where you can then, what's the output on that? What's the output on that
Exactly.
equation? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
So the output would be what? A dosage or timing?
So the output will be a specific product and a dosage of that product.
Okay.
And what to do after that, or what to do before that. It's
Okay.
not actually just cannabis. We're also guiding things about metabolism, things about the environment.
Right.
If you're listening to angry music and you consume cannabis, guess what happens? You feel kind of angry.
Right.
If you're feeling nervous, guess what? The cannabis also brings some of that out. So
Right.
we're trying to guide people, not just with the plant, but also the environment around it.
Right. That totally makes sense. So that's really awesome. Hey, how has your telemedicine aspect of this really affected your business? I mean, I noticed that a lot of the clinics that are out there right now are doing telemedicine. Do you really, and kind of like, I was scratching my head, do you really need to see the patient, or what's your thoughts on that, and how has it affected you?
It's a great question. So I'm fortunate to live in Massachusetts, and the regulatory system in Massachusetts is one of the best in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's really well thought out. It's really well designed to be incredibly safe and patient-centered, as well as business-centered for really both sides. In particular, I was allowed to submit a waiver to let me see patients through telemedicine very early on in the pandemic. because they wisely understood that patients consume cannabis, with great success, helping a wide range of medical conditions that are
Right.
quite severe.
Right.
So being allowed to do it, not every state can say that. So, I'm fortunate in that respect. As far as the business goes, it's been overwhelmingly popular.
Okay.
People want to stay safe. They understand that going to dispensaries, going to clinicians' offices puts them at risk. And this is not a time for any of us to assume more risk.
Right.
We all have to keep safe and just, wait till we as a scientific body can move through this. So it's been incredibly popular. For me, it's wonderful. I get to see many, many more people. There are times where it's quite busy.
Right.
I'm actually up here on vacation and I'm still working because I want to make sure everybody gets seen when they need to be seen.
All right.
But, at times I'm seeing 50, 60 people a day.
Right.
That's a very busy day for me. But it's incredibly rewarding. I get to learn sort of amplified from more and more people. So it's thrilling for me.
Right. That's great. So you do that primarily through like a web-based, like Zoom or something along those lines? And pretty much.
I mean, my take, I'm trying to help design cannabis medicine to be patient-centered. I don't want it to be a paternalistic system like we're used to, where the doctor tells you what you have, tells you what you need, come back to me if you need anything else.
Right.
I want it to be about what does this patient want?
Right.
And how can I help them on their terms?
Right.
So I'm doing Zoom calls with some people that prefer video. We learn a lot face-to-face. I think I'm also doing telephone calls for people that prefer the sort of quick and easy.
Right.
The meat of learning from a patient is really where they're coming from, what their medical history is, what the history of their present concerns are, what kind of other medicines they're taking, and how the cannabis is going. And those are all things which are amenable to surveys.
Right. Right.
So all of my patients come and teach me about who they are and what they're going through surveys. And we follow them over years.
Right. Cool. Hey, I want to get back to this personalized medicine thing, because that's really the crux of this, of the whole, at least your approach. And I think it's a really good one. You have an on-site compounding, or how do you guys typically change it, or change up, or how do you do this? This is really great. This is really cool.
If I had ADD, it would make a lot of sense. I actually am very focused, but on 100 different things at the same time.
Uh-huh.
So my clinic is one passion of mine. And I take that, not just in the United States, we're actually moving abroad to try to expand the clinic. I have an app, as I mentioned, and we're focused on that.
Yeah.
I also have a formulation team, and we're taking what we're learning from the dispensaries consumption, from patients and what they're teaching us. Mm-hmm. We're taking some knowledge from the literature itself, and we're adapting that into understanding what formulations are missing from the market.
Right.
Right now we live in a world that is focused on THC to make people as high as they can be so that they'll spend money. And that's really, the industry globally is hungry for money. They've spent a lot trying to get their stores open and, have legal sales wherever they are. Right. And that's put ownership in a lot of debt. So they're trying to make up a lot of money by selling a lot of THC. Right. The same is largely true of CBD. It's been allowed because it's not scary and making people feel good. Right. Because Lord knows our government systems have had trouble with that in all kinds of ways. Right. So CBD is legal and everybody's trying to sort of be very excited about what they're allowed to do. Right. But in the focus of THC and CBD, we are missing the entire rest of this whole pharmacy that's built into this natural plant. Right. And that's really my focus. That's my passion.
So I noticed, like on the sleep sheet that downloaded from your website, it specifies beta-caryophyllene as one of the key, or myrcene as one of the key aspects to. And I know there's lots of research there specifically for sleep. So do you have formulations where you add a little bit more of that in there, or do you just take whole plant, or what's your approach to that?
I do. I mean, I would love to share with the audience all of our deep, dark secrets, but fortunately I can't. Yeah. The truth is that we live in a very oversimplified commercial culture. Right now, if we are shopping for cannabis products or CBD products, we might see, there's a product that's advertised as for sleep. Right. And there's one that's for focus, and there's one for joy. Right. The truth is that they don't really know what they're selling, what they're putting into those products. Yeah. They might have an idea. There are a couple studies that push them one way. They don't really have a full picture yet. And some of them might work. I'm not saying that they don't work, but it's not really good science. We're not there yet. My team is putting together formulations, and we're not stopping there. We're not really interested in selling them. That's not our goal. We're applying them to people. We're suggesting that they try different combinations, and we're learning from that so that we can teach the rest of the market.
Yeah,
my interest is purely academic.
Okay. So very, very good. I mean, you have recommendations for different ways to take the formulations: vapor, edible, tincture, lotions. Let's kind of talk a little bit about that. I mean, certainly if you're taking a vapor, it's much faster acting, I guess. When would you recommend a vapor over, say, a lotion, for example? What would you think about that?
So it's a good question. Yeah, your lungs seem like two big objects in your chest, but when we look closer, these airbags touch or virtually touch a tennis court size array of micro blood vessels.
Right.
That's the transmission of oxygen and CO2 into the bloodstream. This is a massive surface area. When you inhale something, whether it's oxygen or laughing gas or cannabinoid vapor, that gets distributed almost immediately into your bloodstream through this channel I'm discussing. That instant gratification is something that someone would like if they want results now. They are having trouble sleeping. They want something that's just going to knock them out and make them feel sleepy right now.
Right.
That's different than something which doesn't work right away, but it might last a lot longer.
Okay.
So I'm describing actually edibles. There are people who have trouble, many people actually, who have trouble sleeping because they are too stressed out.
Right.
They're in bed, lying awake, thinking about all the things they forgot to do during the day or the things they have to do the next day.
Right.
And they are sort of tense and tight, and it's a lot of muscular tension causing their difficulty sleeping, as well as the anxiety. Lotions have an incredible ability to relax tense muscles. We've known about this from the multiple sclerosis literature. These patients with multiple sclerosis often have terrible cramping in some of their extremity muscles. Just as an example, there are many other conditions which have tense muscles, but there's a lot of cannabis literature that highlights their relief with cannabinoids. And that's an example of taking the current medical literature and expanding that. We would invite people to experiment with lotions on tense muscles or tense shoulder muscles or thigh muscles or what have you. We even have patients with jaw pain, temporal mandibular joint pain, TMJ pain, and they put the lotion on their joints to feel more relaxed there, and it eases pain.
So it's locality,
so similarly,
essentially. Yeah. It's a local. Okay. Yeah.
It's a local relaxing agent. Yes. And the same is true for sleep. If you were hunkering down after a vigorous day, you might get a massage, and that helps your muscles relax. It helps you feel less tense, and you're probably quite easy to go to sleep. Same thing with the cannabinoid lotions.
What do you think? I mean, some of the lotions, how do you know they get into the muscle? You know what I mean? I always kind of wondered that. Like some of them, just a regular lotion, does it really penetrate the skin to the point where it's in your muscle, or are there some formulations that are better than others? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. The reason we might think it wouldn't work if people know about cannabis and cannabinoids is they're oily molecules. And when you pour oil onto your arm, it's not going to bury into your muscle. It's not going to do anything there. Lotion actually is an emulsification of oil, meaning they sort of mush water products and oil products together with a medium, like a wax. And then we think of wax and, it kind of does stay on, but I don't know if it goes deep. It seems to moisturize maybe dry skin on the top, but does it really go deep? The truth is, cannabinoids do penetrate to a small degree, but it's really the terpenes that are the money. And that's what's taking the cannabinoids and penetrating them more deeply.
They're going through. Well, they're kind of like solvents, right? I mean, solvents do tend to go through. I remember DMSO, for example, is one of those ones where you can stick your finger in it and taste it, a couple of minutes later. So that's kind of interesting there. So cool. Okay. And then edibles are taking much longer. Obviously, they're metabolized differently. Do you have any issues or any thoughts on, like taking a lot of like edibles versus a vapor? It seems like vapor would almost be safer because you're really not running them through your liver, and a lot of the products that you buy now are in fats and things like that, and there's a high fat content to them. What are your thoughts on that?
So there are a couple of concepts you raised there that are really interesting and important. Anything which comes into your bloodstream ultimately gets filtered, and it's all going through your liver eventually.
Right.
The fact that it happens a little bit more directly from your GI tract is relevant because things which are filtered through your GI tract feel differently. They're sort of tagged, as it were, with chemical tags, which make it stay around a little bit longer or make it flush more quickly down the toilet.
Right.
So the effect of how your body metabolizes these things is different whether you're breathing it or consuming it by mouth. Metabolism is also governed by many other things. Our level of exercise. If you're someone who wakes up in the morning and does not exercise, the same amount of cannabis is going to affect you differently than someone who is exercising vigorously in the morning.
I see.
Unfortunately, the complexity does not stop there. If you are hydrated, if you're not hydrated, if you have a fatty meal, if you have a not fatty meal, if you have a sugary meal, all of these things, and you think about the kinds of edibles that you would have, generally they want to sell them so they're chock full of sugar.
Right.
Or they want the chocolate to taste good and it's chock full of butter.
Right.
So all of these things actually, even alongside the cannabis, have an impact in how the cannabis feels.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Hey, I wanted to go quickly back to your app again because I think it's so cool, and something came up in my mind. What do you do with adverse events, and how are you recording those? And in your clinical practice, how are you dealing with those, and what kinds of things have you seen?
It's a good question. So the people who hated cannabis and demonized cannabis spent years and at the time probably hundreds of dollars because it was in the 30s and through 60s. But they spent a lot of their time demonizing cannabis. It was all bad.
Yeah.
And I think the mistake that modern modern clinicians, modern science should not make is to have an argument which is cannabis is all good. It is not. There are people who have unpleasant reactions. The good thing about cannabis is that the unpleasant reactions we see are not long lasting and they're not killing anybody. Right. So the most important things are boxes that are checked off. That being said, there are bad effects. There are adverse effects, things we don't want necessarily when we take cannabis. Those range from upset stomachs to diarrhea to dry eyes, which are incredibly itchy and uncomfortable, dry throats. Everybody kind of jokes about cotton mouth, meaning you feel like you have a mouthful of cotton. And part of that is because cannabinoids interact with your mucus secreting membranes. If your eyes are not tearing as readily, you're going to feel dry eyes. You might have rubbing between your eyeball and your eyelid, and that might cause red eyes. If you don't have secretions in your mouth, pouring saliva into your mouth, you might feel like you have a dry mouth. So there are things which are not rocket science. We understand where they come from. And we have to know about them. We have to learn about them from patients. That's really what it comes from. Right. So to your question, how do we deal with that? In the app, we are learning. The app is really about learning. It's about one person teaching us. And actually, we are giving that right back to the next person who's using the app. And we're sort of creating an app as a central train station for people to teach one another about their cannabis use. Right. So we take an open-minded approach to learn what people are finding. We give them opportunity to teach us, was this all good? What were the things you didn't like? What were the things you did like? And then, you know what? With that information, we're going to make a change, or the machine will make a change, and we're going to give you another recommendation. And then you tell us how that goes. And we're fine-tuning this process among thousands of people. So we create something which works best for everybody. Right.
So you had mentioned the industrial pharmaceutical FDA complex at the very beginning. Wondering how have you interacted with anybody in kind of in that sphere, and what are their reactions to what you're doing?
Of course. I mean, and I hope I'm not misstating myself. I don't think they're the bad guys. Yeah. We need pharmaceuticals. We need a medicine industry to reach people in hospitals. Right now, the system is archaic. It needs to change, but it is not changed yet, and it won't change for a while. There's a delay in evolution of medicine, which is healthy for all of us. We don't want medicine to change one day from the next very quickly. Right. So that being said, I do engage with the pharmaceutical industries to some degree. I know a lot of the owners, I know a lot of the researchers, and I work with them on a better understanding of what they can produce. Part of the problem that they face, and that we all should be aware of, is that pharmaceutical products must be the same thing. If you're in the hospital and you're taking a pill, we know darn sure that
Right.
that pill is the same pill that you got last time and the same pill that Joe, Jane, and Josh are all getting to solve the same problem. We have to have that consistency.
Right.
That consistency depends on a minimum number of ingredients.
Right.
Pills, medicines which are FDA approved, have usually one ingredient, sometimes two. Boy, oh boy, very rarely more than that.
Right.
So take that reality that pills have to have few ingredients, and then you turn to a natural pharmaceutical plant, which has maybe thousands of these.
Thousands, absolutely.
And we face a problem, right? We
Right.
can't get this medicine, this plant medicine, into a pill. That's very hard. When the two are studied against one another, the plant always wins.
Right.
This is something about nature, about our complexity, the complexity of being human, which is a better match than pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is fantastic. I think this is sort of commanding humility in science, in pharmaceuticals, that we cannot do it better than nature.
Right.
And that's one of the beautiful things about what we're doing here.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. So last question. I hear you have kids in the background. That's cool. You have 4 kids?
I do. Yeah.
All
4
right.
kids, 2
All
girls,
right.
2 boys. I'm a blessed man.
We have same thing. Two girls, 2 boys. So it's cool. So what is your thoughts on giving cannabis to a pediatric patient or a pediatric? I mean, a lot of people would shy away from that.
Yep.
However, we know that there's a tremendous amount of benefits that can come to those for specific indications. So what has been your approach to the pediatric side of this?
It's a great question. It's a rich discussion. I'm a family doctor, so I'm trained and fascinated by the pediatric population, the adult population, and the geriatric population, as well as obstetrics and gynecology. Everything that's common for human suffering is really my passion, and that includes cannabis and pediatrics. First of all, it's important to understand that pediatric cannabis, when we're talking about children and cannabis, we're not talking about kids, hoodlums fooling around.
Right.
You know, we're talking about children who are very sick. They've tried other medicines, they've tried other therapies, and they're failing left, right, and center.
Right.
When they have no other options, we can move to something which is more experimental, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, cannabis is not that experimental. It's been around for millennia, as long as probably humans have been around. And we know, as we discussed before, it's mostly non-toxic, but we don't understand well enough how it interacts with children's brains as they're growing and lasting over time. There are actually 3 major hallmark studies that have looked at mothers while they're pregnant consuming cannabis and breastfeeding, while they're breastfeeding, consuming cannabis. And we watch the children over time.
Right.
And we don't see terrible things. We see some small differences in behavior. We see some questionable differences in learning, but nothing that's really meaningful. You and I don't know of, that's the kid whose mother had cannabis.
Right.
We don't know that because it's really hard to find.
Right.
There are countries whose use of cannabis is enmeshed in their culture, and we don't see anything that's problematic about them. Just as many geniuses come out of there and successful everything come out of those countries as everywhere else.
Right.
So to some extent, we need to be cautious because it is new and we must care most about our children.
Right.
But on the other hand, we can be optimistic. And one important lesson I think that's important to think about with children is life is hard for everybody, no matter what you're doing, no matter who you are, no matter how rich or poor or where you live, life has difficulties. If there is a substance which can make those difficulties a little bit easier, then a child who engages in that extra substance, that crutch, as it were, might lose the skills to engage with life, which is difficult. It's important for us as we go through difficult times to be able to cry it out, to be able to ask for help, to be able to compensate, to cope with difficult times. If someone is taking a medicine, whether it's cannabis or an anxiety medicine or a depression medicine, if they take a medicine and it makes everything okay, they forget how to engage in these skills.
Right.
This is a long way of saying the difficulties that I've seen with children consuming cannabis or adolescents consuming cannabis are indistinguishable from the children who have lost those skills.
I see.
I don't think there is anything which is terribly damaging in a long-lasting way for these very, very sick children relative to the other medicines and therapies they would be taking anyway.
Right, right. Makes sense. It does make sense. What would you say to the group that would say, well, look, you have to break out every indication and do clinicals on every indication and go through the process, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of that complex that we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to kids. What do you think about, I mean, we're kind of saying, hey, look, I don't know if we have time to wait for that process, or what do you think? Do we have to have incontrovertible clinical evidence for every remedy that we put out? I guess I don't know.
It's a delicious question. The internet has made us think that there is an answer for everything, that we have now magic on our phones, that we can learn everything as instantly as it seems imaginary. The truth is, medicine has always been partly a science, partly an art. There are no right answers. You know, we're discussing individuality because there are no broad brushes which paint everybody the same way.
Right.
That complexity is so important, and is so important for us to remember, especially with children.
Mm-hmm.
We can't paint everybody with a broad brush.
Right.
We have to take individual circumstances, accountable.
Well, I think that definitely answers the question, and kind of just sheds a light on really the future of medicine, really, and probably the future of your clinic too, and your work. I mean, it's just heading more towards that. Well, already being in the vanguard of personalization, number one, and second of all, just continuing to get the data so that we can learn from what we're doing.
Right. And what a brilliant antidote to the broken medical system we have now, right?
Yeah.
Where people feel like the doctor doesn't have time for them.
Right.
The doctor's looking at a computer. Someone is bean counting how much this will cost and that will cost. And it's, what about me as a person? What about getting to know me and helping me?
Right.
That is gone.
It's almost like, so if it was truly just a pure equation, we wouldn't need doctors at all. It would just be, here, put the input A, input B, input C. Okay, pops out in output D, and there you go. I mean, there it is. So we don't need doctors for that. That's an equation, right? So it's not that. That's your point, right? So
exactly. It's the opposite of that.
It's the opposite of that.
Right. It's starting off with the complexity here, even mathematically, we cannot understand the interaction of all of these cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids in this plant.
Right.
We do not have the quantum computing yet,
right,
to be able to understand that. But that doesn't mean we're penniless. We're empty. We can come with the best knowledge we can. We can learn from studies as we're normally learning from them. We can learn from anecdote and patient experience, as we know how to do, and we put those together with the best state of the art science, and that's what I'm trying to do with the companion app.
Makes sense. Well, it's been very good to talk to you. I appreciate your time, and
thank you. Likewise.
I wish you the best of luck. So can you give us a little bit more information about how people can get in touch with you and how they would interact with your materials and things like that?
Of course, yeah. So the clinic website is not really a marketing engine. I'm trying to make it an education sort of tool for people. There are handouts that are there. There are links to archives of literature. I've tried to curate every piece of cannabis literature that comes out into a place where everybody can read for free. I'm trying to give back to people the things I think they would want to read. I'm also doing webinars now if people have interest. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about how cannabis interacts with coronavirus. Just recently, we talked about cannabis and sleep, actually.
Okay.
We're going to do cannabis and anxiety and stress and pain. And we actually have a grow series coming where we're going to invite a bunch of master growers to teach people about the nuances and the art of growing cannabis.
Okay. All right.
So we're trying to pour resources out there on social media. I have a Twitter account at Dr. Caplan, Dr. Caplan, which is all about translating a research trial into non-jargon language so everybody can understand and talk about it in common terms.
Wonderful.
And then, of course, there's always direct access for people that want more personalized attention. We specialize in that.
Okay. It's been good talking to you, and thank you for your time. And
Thank you so much.
We'll just take it from there. So thanks a lot, Dr.
Appreciate it.
Caplan.
Look forward to it. My pleasure. All right, take care.
Bye.